Good morning, Higher Human. Today I'm going to quickly go through Unit 2, Key Area 1A, which is just the male reproductive system. So hopefully we'll be able to label the structures of the male reproductive organs. We're going to talk about the role of what's called the testes, the prostate gland, and the seminal vesicle. There is a slight amount of extra stuff on some of the slides. I'm going to try and cut through that and show you what is actually needed for the exam. So for National 5, you should know the structure of the male and female reproductive systems. You should pause the video just now and try and do as good a sketch as you can of the male and female reproductive systems. You could describe also what gametes are and what fertilization is and what is produced by fertilization. So the answers to those questions would be the male reproductive system has the penis connected internally to the testes, as far as we're aware so far, and the female reproductive system has as the external orifice the vagina, moving in towards the cervix, which is the opening to the uterus. We have the uterus, which is in a V shape, with the endometrium, which is the lining of the womb, and then we have two corridors going left and right, which are called the oviducts. Some people call it the fallopian tubes, but in the higher human course, it is the oviduct. And that leads us to the ovary, where the ovum, which is the higher human word for egg, that's where they develop. We'll talk more about the female side of the reproductive system in the next video. Gametes are sex cells. So for males, that's the sperm, and for females, that is the ova, which is the egg. Fertilization is the process where the unfertilized ova is penetrated by the sperm, and the nuclei of the sperm and the ova fuse to form a single nuclei. That is fertilization, the fusion of those nuclei of the gametes. The thing that's produced during fertilization is the zygote, which goes from, if we remember our National 5 biology, two haploid cells, which are the gametes, to one diploid cell, which is the zygote. So you should know the reproductive organs that produce each gamete, that the male gamete is sperm, the female gamete is a National 5, often called egg, but higher human ova. The male reproductive organ is the testes, and the female is the ovary. So again, you can pause the video and see if you can label as much of this as possible. It's two sections, 5 and 6. Is it 5 and 6? Yeah, it's 5 and 6, which you don't yet know the words for necessarily. Okay, I'm going to go through the answers. So 1 is the testes, this, as we'll talk about later. And then we have the urethra. This isn't in chronological order. We've got the testes, we've got the urethra. The urethra is the exit pipe for both semen and also urine. We have number 3, which is just basically like a corridor. It's like the oviduct fallopian tube is in females. It connects the urethra to the testes. Number 4 is the penis. And what is number 5 and what is number 6? It seems to be these weird squiggly things that are on the outside of the sperm tubes. So the female parts, again, just while we're here. Number 1, I'll pause the video, have a wee look, see if you can work it out, and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, the answers are 1 would be the vagina, 2 would be, because there's a number 4 here, 2 would be the uterus, or the womb in higher human, again, because it's higher and it's sciencey, we have to call it the uterus. Number 3 is the oviduct. Again, you don't get the mark if you call it fallopian tube. But we're skipping to number 4, which is the cervix. When we talk about contraception, this is where things like the coil, both marina and copper, would be implanted. And when we talk about a mucus plug, which is lovely, obviously, in the cervix, this is where it would sit. The oviduct was here. Number 5, we have the endometrium. So again, you might not be familiar with that term, but we'll cover it a lot in the next key area 2. And we've got number 6, the star of the female reproductive system, which is the ovary. That's where the immature ova are stored. So in males, the sex cell is the sperm. We've talked at National 5 about specialization. So it's got this streamlined head, it's got the intermediate section here that's full of mitochondria, and it's got a tail to allow it to move. Middle piece, very sciencey. And obviously, because it's a cell, it'll have a cell membrane. The nucleus would be contained within the head. So sperm are produced in an organ called the testes. We've talked a little bit about germline cells before. So these are the gametes. We talked about meiosis in the first key area of Unit 1. So if you want a wee recap on meiosis, please go and do that in your own time. The male reproductive system. So we've talked about the penis, urethra, sperm duct, testes, and scrotum is just the flesh-like sac. Interestingly, it has a crisscross of muscles, the dartos and the cremaster that kind of bring it in and bring it up. But that's not in the course, so we won't talk about it. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We've got the seminal vesicle and we've got the prostate gland. So the main extra thing about this key area 1A is learning what those two do. And there's lots of really, really complicated diagrams like this that I will flick back to in a second. But I think it's best to give you a less confusing version of this diagram, and then we'll flick back. So I said less confusing. If you imagine the testes, it is actually internally a big kind of spiral of what are called seminiferous tubules. So in the center of the testes, that's where we start. We have the very, very immature, just myosed sperm cells. So they've just been made out of the gamete mother cell. As they move round this, moving their way round slowly through this kind of convoluted tubule, which is called the seminiferous tubule, they will eventually work their way out of the testes. So this, unfortunately, cover thing is the testes. When they get to here, they will be stored in this sac. It's called the epididymis. It's, again, not part of the course, but I think it's an interesting thing to know. So above the testes is a kind of crenulated, weird, squishy sac, and that stores the sperm that have been matured and produced in the testes, but are not yet ready for ejaculation. You don't want every time a sperm works its way to maturity, it to immediately be ejaculated. That'd be very inconvenient. So we have this little storage sac that upon stimulation can be emptied through ejaculation. At this point, the sperm are not in any fluid of any great note. So this is kind of a dry sac of just sperm. So they work their way around and they were matured. Your question might be, what are these orange dots and how did they become matured? So as they work their way around, these orange dots are called interstitial cells. Interstitial just means between. So these, as you can see, are cells that are in between the seminiferous tubules. So as the sperm is working its way around, these orange dots, these interstitial cells, are producing testosterone. So the testosterone diffuses out and it gets into the seminiferous tubules. When it gets in, it comes in contact with the sperm and it helps to mature it. So that's one of the functions of testosterone, is produced by the interstitial cell. It diffuses into the seminiferous tubules and matures the sperm. Hopefully that makes sense. So we can see here, we're in the testes. Inside the testes, if we zoom in, there's this, so it's quite a complicated diagram. There's this weird kind of squiggly lines. Those are the seminiferous tubules. And in between, if we cut through, in a painful gesture, cut through the middle of that testes, you would see that there's dots in between the seminiferous tubules. These are the interstitial cells. So the interstitial cells are in between the seminiferous tubules and they feed them with testosterone. That's all you really need to know. So seminiferous tubules produce sperm and the interstitial cells secrete testosterone. The next little thing from this key area, and the last bit, is what do the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland do? We know about the testes, we know about seminiferous tubules, and we know about interstitial cells. So semen is only 10% sperm and 90% fluid. So when sperm comes out, when semen comes out, it is not a dry substance, it is wet because of the fluid. As the sperm leave the epididymis, they move their way up this sperm tube, which scientifically is called the vas deferens, the sperm tube, and they hit a gland. They hit the seminal vesicle, and a little bit of fluid is squished in, and then they hit the prostate gland, and more fluid is squished in. The seminal vesicle and prostate gland, you don't need to know individually what they do, you just need to know their overall function. So we'll come on to that in a second. The fluids as a group from the seminal vesicle and prostate gland provide liquid which maintains the mobility. So mobility is the ability to move. So as I said, sperm up until they get to that point are quite dry. When they got into the female, they would not be able to swim if they weren't in a fluid. So the fluid produced by these glands allows them to move, so motility, and viability. That means helping them to survive. So again, if they got into the barren wasteland that is the female reproductive system that hates them and is trying to kill them, they don't have any food. But luckily, they're in semen, which feeds them with fructose and other things that keep them alive. So this fluid gives them mobility, allowing them to swim, and viability, allowing them to go through respiration. So this is again a slightly unfortunate diagram that should summarize it. We got to the point where the interstitial cells have fed testosterone to the seminal vesicles, seminiferous tubules. They got round, stored in the epididymis. As they are ejaculated, they are first through a kind of contracted process called peristalsis, pushed dry up the sperm tube. They first meet a seminal vesicle, which squishes a little bit of liquid in, helps them along a little bit, and then the prostate gland gives the rest of the fluid. And then we traverse from the inside of the body, where the green ends, to the outside of the body, where the penis starts. And then obviously that is ejaculated into the female. So what you should know is actually not all that much. Gamete production in the testes. Testes produce sperm in the seminiferous tubules and testosterone in the interstitial cells. The prostate gland and seminal vesicles secrete fluids that maintain the mobility and viability. So you don't need to know which one's which. In your notes, it asks you to tell it if you want to fill in that particular box in full. You can just write across both of it, mobility and viability, or I will, obviously you can pause the slide on this and you can write in what it says. So seminal vesicles give you the sugars, and the prostate gland is mostly to do with maintaining mobility. That's all we need to know for this key area. Next, we will go on to look at the female side of this, so how ova are protected, matured, and fertilized. If you have any questions, please do ask.